Welcome everyone to this week's edition of Midweek Mysticism. A thank you to the many sponsors on this call. If you want to sponsor this class, virtually all of you already have actually, so thank you. This is the most sponsored class we've ever run. But if you haven't and want to do that, you should feel free to make a donation of any amount at bethshalom-ri.org in the chat. And you too can be a sponsor. And part of why I think I'm being asked to promote that is because without events, which are what synagogues do, it's complicated to figure out how they pay the bills. So we're grateful, while also acknowledging it's a tough time for a lot of people. And with that, we move to the Zohar. We were discussing the teaching of the letters, or the Aleph Bet de Rabbi Akiva, this midrashic teaching, which appears in different versions in different collections, different medieval collections, about all of the letters auditioning before God to be the letter that the Torah starts with. And it's my thesis that each of the letters, when they come, represent some thesis about what creation is about. Like what's the telos, or the point of creation. And the rejection or deflection of the letter, sometimes it's a deflection, like sometimes it's no, you're a bad letter, and sometimes it's you belong better over here, or some such comment, tells us something deeper. Also, it's worth noting that letters themselves in a mystical tradition, as I mentioned last time, in most mystical traditions, words are seen as anathema or in tension with the mystical quest of knowing God. So most like Eastern mystical traditions are silent, but the Jewish mystical tradition and others, it's not the only one, broadly looked positively at words and communication. See our liturgy, which is full of words. If you ever looked at Jewish liturgies, God, there are so many words, the books just get longer and longer. So yeah, it's a wordy tradition. So we actually viewed using the letters as like evocative of mystical states, even mystical states you can't describe in letters, through letters. So you can, there's something inherent about these letters as part of the dark energy that you can't see, that makes the world go round, that doesn't quite make sense. And it's because if we're trying to say that the world is deeply interconnected spiritually, that the sfirot don't create the world, but that God emanates a world that is organically connected through and through, and that's what we mean by unity, then letters actually, or deep connections that are invisible, are going to run throughout the very, it's like water or oxygen, it's the basics of existence. And also human speech becomes then a mirror, or an approximation of that. And so speech can be used to elevate. I think we know in very pragmatic contextual terms that speech can be used to elevate or debase. This is a very refined spiritual teaching about that. Broadly, not in those terms, but broadly, the letters here are seen as having this mystic significance. And my hope, if you say, well, what should I take away? That you might take away sort of the refined nature with which letters and communication are being regarded in general. I sometimes walk away from this regretting things I said, or wanting to speak in a different sort of way. So that might be a sort of ethical takeaway from studying these kinds of letters. So that's the first broad comment I wanted to make, and I think a welcome to Rabbi Confer. Is that Marcia there too? We just did a little background about, about speech in Judaism, and the letters and sound and words, not as anathema to the mystical experience, which is indescribable, but actually is able to construct or create or tap into the deep letters of the cosmos, which are ingrained in creation and part of a world that is interconnected. That's what communication is about. So that's the intro. And now we'll go to the text. Is that fair? I just wanted to ground this teaching, like what's it doing in the Zohar? The other thing I'll say, actually, and then we'll go, is that the Zohar very much is a work of poetry, or more than poetry, ecstasy is probably a better word. The language itself is ecstatic. You can feel the energy brimming in the way the authors write, and they are trying to describe ineffable spiritual experiences, but the Zohar is also really long. Like other spiritual works are short, and it's a lot of words. So there may be some self-awareness in the Zohar that it's taking the mystical path not of silent retreat, but of lyric ecstasy. And with that, to the letter Yud. Any questions or comments that anyone wants to add about what I just said, which is just my musings on this teaching from like 100 feet in the air? Okay. So, and if you have your own version of the mat at home, which is, I know, a book or translation that's incredible that many of you are working from, this would be on page 15 there, but we'll screen share it here as well. Alat at Yud, Amra Kameh, Ribon Alma, Nicha Kamach Lemivre Bi Alma, the Ana Sherusa Dishma Kadisha, V'auz Lach Lemivre Bi Alma. Amar La, Dilach de Ant Chakik Bi, V'ant Rashim Bi, V'chol Uta Dili Bach Salik. Late Ant Yaut Li'it Akram Min Shemi.
If you know how.
I have to scroll up. The letter Yud entered. She said to him, Master of the world, may it please you to create the world by me, for I am the beginning. In the Zohar, by the way, the Aramaic is Sherusa, which, here they translate it's the beginning of the holy name. It is fitting for you to create the world by me. He replied, it is enough for you to be engraved in me, inscribed in me. I desire you entirely. Ascend. You should not be uprooted from my name. So we're dealing with an interesting thing here. Broadly, back to our favorite chart, we never get away from this chart for very long, as you may recall. The 4 letters of God's name often are mapped in the mystical tradition onto the Sfirot. And this is early in the Kabbalah, you see this repeatedly in the Pardes Rimonim of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, the writings of Joseph Jekatila, and others. You see it early and often in the Kabbalah, is my point. You get this equation where I'm not going to write God's name, I guess, but can I annotate? I can do this. Draw. No, I just draw things. Okay, so here you get Yud. Do people see the Yud I put there? Yud, good. Right, and here you get hey. I'm spelling out the letters in case you're wondering what's going on here. Here you get I don't know, maybe that's how we spell Vav. And then Malchut, Shechina, the final is Hey. So you actually get a system where the 4 letters of God's name, this name, are mapped onto different sphirot, where Yud represents wisdom. You see here, it's even called primordial point or beginning in the map. And that's because the shape of Yud, which is essentially a dot floating in the air, represents like wisdom from on high. Do you see why it's on high? Because the Yud is floating. Yes, it's suspended. And it is not attached to the line. You know, when you're writing in like second grade and there's a line, it's not attached to the line. So it's not grounded. It is, you know, we've spoken about Binah before, being understanding, but really being both the emanation of God's principles of how the world works, and also the only place we can really get to. Remember that? We described this as the gate or the place that's locked. And like, we can only get to this kind of point. Beyond this is beyond where we go as people in a lot of this mystical thought. So this represents a source of wisdom that is beyond. We're humble to this. We can't get there. And so when the Yud wants to create the world, representing divine wisdom, and there is a hava, I mean, a supposition that would say, well, yeah, the world is created with great wisdom, right? You get that. You get why Yud wants to make this claim. Wisdom is what creates the world, because that's actually how the world is designed, with unfathomable wisdom. We can't understand how a universe was created. Forget just the physical universe, let alone anything that might undergird that or be beyond that. It's immense, and just the size of it is immense, right? So how do we, it's way beyond us. It's from a deeper place. We can tap into it from above, but it's external. So you get why Yud would want to do that, but you also get God's rejection here of saying, ascend. Right? Yud ascend. You know what God says? Ascend. That means like Yud is trying to get on the line. Yud is trying to drop down like a vav. Does that make sense in this model? And God's saying, you're a floating letter. You stay in the sky. In other words, there are some parts of divine wisdom that not only can't you not understand them, which is where we were with Bina, which are me. Remember we said Bina is like me, is who? It's the place of wondering who God is. There's another spiritual place beyond who, of total submission and saying, I will never understand. Does anyone know like that place from personal existence of just resignation to not even understanding that you don't understand, like not even wondering that you don't, just being beyond understanding? Or maybe you're not there, because who could be there, because it's beyond what we would even know to not understand. That's this. So that's what happens. Now, when God says, I desire you entirely, how do I stop this thing I'm doing? Stop. Oh man, okay. Clear all drawings. When God says, I desire you entirely, that's because this is only for God. You understand? In other words, God is fully present with this wisdom, but only for God. Does that make sense? You should not be uprooted from my name. There's something about a deity which is by definition going to be beyond people. This is an important self-reminder for the Zohar crowd. Or for you, when we're trying to understand God, there's a sense that we think we're going to understand it all. And we already did the teaching of actually the highest places in after all of the inquiry still being left in a state of awe. But now we're going to an even higher place in that, which is knowing that even your state of awe is not the end all be all. There's a place beyond you. The universe is bigger than you. We not I, right? So that's the thing. So that's, I think, my take on Yud. I don't know if anyone else has a comment about Yud, but that's the idea here of wisdom. And then wisdom wants to create the world in a sense. And then there's this sense of, no, people aren't going to know it all. That's really actually powerful. now to think we won't know it all. Because I think all of us kind of want to know it all, right? We like want to understand everything about the coronavirus, want to understand exactly how to remedy societies. There's a sense of like, well, I know. I read an article 2 days ago and now I know. So we don't know. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try to know, but we should also know what we don't know. Okay. I've said enough? Yeah? Next letter? Yes, Michael.
Rabbi, just a question. Usually when these letters say their piece and told to leave, the Yud says is stuck in the name of God and he doesn't leave, or she doesn't.
Yeah.
That seems to be unusual in this pattern.
It is unusual, and it's
Whether it
actually
means-
deeply significant to the teaching. So let's stay on that. Why doesn't Yud leave? Yud is stuck to God, meaning God's wisdom God understands, yes? So it's not that Yud isn't present. That is background radiation for all of, I'm working with the metaphor here of cosmic background radiation, which is a scientific term, for all of creation, God's wisdom, right? So that is present still. It's just not going to start the Torah. So it doesn't leave. Think of it like the parchment. You know, it's like
Well,
there.
Looking ahead, I see that Vav doesn't leave either, but I don't remember what happened to Hey.
Well, we're not up to Hey yet. Yeah.
Oh, I'm looking for Hey.
Well, we'll get there. We'll get there today.
Okay.
All right. So Alat Atet. It's a good point, Michael. I appreciate the reminder. Alat Atet. Amrakame Ribon Alma. Nilcha Kamech Lemivre Bi Alma Da Ant Bi It Kriyat Tov Yashar. Amar La Every Bach Alma Da Hatuvach Satim Begavach. It's a Fum Begavach. Hadahu Dechtiv. Ma Rav Tuvacha Sher Sapant L'Reacha. Ho'il Veganiz Begavach Leit Be Chuka LaAlma Da Ana Ba'e Lemivre. Ella Be'alma Da'ate. The tuda of the tuvach ganiz begavach yitbeun tare dehechala, hada hu dechtiv taf uv aretz sharea, v'tu lekiblach kach titchabrun kechada ha chet, v'yada atvach ilen lach b'shima b'shvitin kadishin miyad nafkat mikameh. So making you dizzy. The letter Tet entered. She said to him, Master of the world, may it please you to create the world by me, for you are called Tov V'Yashar, good and upright. So this is a claim about the Torah, which is God's goodness, right? You are called good and upright. People see what's going on. So this is a claim about theodicy. Maybe the point of the Torah is to tell us how God is good, to answer the question of like why the righteous suffer, or like where is God's goodness in the world? That question that all the religious, Harold Kushner wrote the book, right? All that. But is it about God's goodness? That is a claim in the mystics, mind you. The Ramchal makes that claim, that God created the world to bestow his goodness on people. Anyone ever? I mean, that's a pretty good. So he replied, I will not create the world by you, for your goodness is concealed and hidden within you. Again, the shape of the letter, what happens? It curls in. So it's goodness, but the goodness is not revealed. Yeah, which is something about good in our world. Like there's a principle in Jewish law, schar b'hai alma leka, that reward, if you're looking for reward, ultimate reward in this world, it doesn't exist. This is a rabbinic axiom. So there's that idea here too. The good is hidden here. So if you're looking to see God's goodness manifest in our world, you're not going to find it. It's hidden. As it is written, how abundant is your goodness that you've hidden away for those in awe of you. Now, it can be accessed by the hidden tzaddikim, right? By people who are righteous or who have awe. They can discover goodness. And this also explains to us that goodness is a frame of mind. a subjective frame of mind from the perspective of a person. It isn't an objective. Like the world is not good. The world is not anything. We could perceive goodness, right? That's a perception about what happens, is that it's good. It's like something tasting good, yum or yuck, good or bad, fair or unfair. So this is a construct, it's subjective, it's personal. It's hidden, except for the righteous. Since it is hidden within you, it plays no part in this world that I'm about to create, but rather in the world to come. So that's something deep about our society, right? Like if you're looking to find a good God in a good world, don't look in the Torah. It's not going to answer that question. That's not for this world, but a different one, the world that's coming. I always prefer the world that's coming. They means. See something for a second. Yeah. Okay. Furthermore, because your goodness is hidden within you, the gates of the temple will sink. The word for sink, right, is it starts with the same letter of tet. As it is written, her gates tav-u. And why do they sink? Because the letters open on the top. So if you fill it with water, it's going to fill up with water and sink. You see, so there's two things about the letter. It's hidden, but also it sinks. So it's not just that sink starts the word. The shape of the letter is going to sink if it gets thrown into a body of water. And they quote a verse from Eicha, from Lamentations, decrying the destruction of the temple. Her gates have sunk. So this is the Zohar's interpretation of her gates have sunk. Why do they sink? Because the letter tet, there's something about goodness which isn't manifest. So this is a deeper comment about the temple, right? The existence of the temple is a manifestation of God's blessing and goodness in the world. That's the idea of the temple. So the answer is temples sink. First of all, they're hidden. You don't see them. You don't see the goodness in the world. And then eventually they sink to the bottom of the ocean. So this is a deeply realistic, if depressing, teaching. There's a relationship between goodness and being sunk into the earth. Further, facing you, it's worse though. In addition to the two fatal problems inherent in the shape of the letter, there's also the letter next to you, which is chet. And when you join together, you spell chet, sin, when you put these two letters together. So these two letters are not inscribed in the holy tribes. The only two letters not mentioned in any of the tribes of Israel that were inscribed on the breastplate of the Kohen, of the priest, are these two. Something in the chat. No worries. She immediately left his presence. Ted actually, I think, gets a pretty thorough rejection. So, question for the group. When they say that when you join with chet, you become sin, rather than just shortening the teaching by disposing of two letters in one, what's the relationship between the goodness and the uprightness that are described in the original part, the Hava Amina, and the rejection that you're also sin? Like there's an interplay between good and sin here, which is blurring those distinctions a little bit, but it's not evident to me exactly what they are. So I'm wondering if anyone sees. Do you understand the question?
Yeah, and a second part of the question, I don't get why it's connected to the sinking of the temple. I mean, you gave the idea that the water could fill in the top, but yeah, I'm not getting the bad part and the good part connection either.
I wonder if this might be kind of going into a little ganza philosophia here, but when you look at Tet, I guess the two things, two metaphoric ideas I was thinking about, first with the idea of the white fire kind of idea, because if it's the letters sort of hidden, or the goodness is hidden, is it saying the space around the letter is what the letter is? And then I kind of, again, this is a little bit far out, but looking at Tet, it almost kind of resembles the Kruvim on top of the ark, and sort of how the space between the Kruvim is supposed to be where the testimony from Hashem it emanates from. So something about that, and I don't know. Again, this is kind of completing this sort of like Ganze Philosophia here, like the something about the destruction of the temple also ultimately, kind of takes down the sort of idea of the Kruvim and the idea of having that direct connection with Hashem. Okay, I'll reel it back in.
No, that's really interesting. Right, the letter Tet as like the Kruvim, the angels on top of the ark, right, facing each other, and you see like the depression as they sink, representing the sinking of the temple. It's right. It's a good question, Rabbi Kong, for why is the temple sinking? The temple here represents Shekhinah, or God's presence fully manifest. So there's almost a teaching here which is kind of saying, so long as goodness is hidden in our world, temples are going to be destroyed. Like almost the natural state of temples, of Jewish temples, isn't to be built, but to be destroyed. There's like a sort of exile mentality to the teaching that may be why the temple is sort of coming in. But I don't know.
And there was something similar when we were on it with the shape of the top of the tzadi that I don't remember.
Yeah, actually, they referenced the Tet.
Back, and I forgot the way it faced, and I think you referred to the fact that it was going to come back with the Tet.
Yeah, so the problem with the tzadi, so that's this. Okay, that's the higher level question. This is like the Tosafot question on this. Tosafot always asks from one place to another. Earlier in the teaching, we talked about the tzadi representing like Adam and Eve, but unable to see each other as one androgynous being in the creation. And they couldn't face each other. They were like stuck facing apart, and they turned this way and that way. And that symbolized not being able to see people for who they are with empathy, but rather sort of being stuck in our own perspectives and the nature of righteousness in that way. And then God splits through surgery, this androgynous tzadi, and says, you will arise elsewhere. This is the elsewhere. So now, if you imagine post-surgery, they are facing each other at least. Like you were saying, Joe, with the Kruvim. But so it's a different level problem than the self-righteousness problem. It's the hidden goodness problem.
It seems like Chet, has some advantageous features. We're talking about the structures of letters, and that just sort of passes by without comment.
Say more.
I mean, I missed many things and I have zero learning, but I'm saying if we're talking about letters in terms of sort of what their, shape tells us about their qualities, I'm sorry not to hear any comments about Chet from the text.
Yeah, it doesn't even try a positive one. It just joins it to sin. Right, it could be Chaim, life, right? And it has a symmetry to it and a stability to it, and it's not going to sink, and it is covered in a roof. And you can imagine lots of attractive qualities to the shape of the letter. I don't know if these are some that you have in mind. But they're not mentioned. Okay, so I realized sometimes in the Zohar there will be more questions than answers. Always. but particularly now. So continue to, if things germinate at any point, even later, speak up. Alat Zion comes. Adam Rakame Ribon Alma Nicha Kamachlim Rabbi Alma. What about me? Devi Natrin Binach Shabbat Dechtiv Zachor et Yom HaShabbat Lekadasho Amar la Ivri Bach Amad Ant Ibach Krava V'Charba Deshinina V'Romcha Dekirva Kegavna Denun Miad Nafka Ikame. So the letter Zion entered. She said to him, Master of the world, may it please you to create the world by me, for by me your children observe the Sabbath, as it is written, Zachor, remember the Sabbath day to hallow it. So in this case, and why are we making a claim that the Sabbath should be the foundation of creation? Because the Sabbath is actually the apex of the creation story. Like, in other words, the conclusion of the actual story of creation is Shabbat. So it seems like a story about building up to Shabbat, which represents in the Sfirot both Shekhinah, Malchut, but also Shabbat represents in the Sfirot the union between Shekhinah and Binah, both He in the divine name and both female, sometimes described as mother-daughter. This represents an integrated relationship between the Sfirot from the human perspective. So there's something about Shabbat and this whole link here, which becomes, so Kabbalistically there's what to say, but just in the text, like of Breshit, it's about Shabbat, about getting to Shabbat, yes? Which is interesting. So he replied, I will not create the world by you, for you imply war, a sharp sword and a spear for battle. So the word Zion, like Kalei Zion, in especially Old Biblical Hebrew, means weapon, or a Kalei Zion is a weapon, and Zion is like warfare. So it also ends in a final nun, which is like a the Zion is a sword, maybe, and the nun is a spear, or violent. She immediately left his presence. So actually juxtaposing Shabbat and violence is jarring, maybe. What is the relationship or interplay between Shabbat and spears and swords?
Well, now I'm thinking in terms of your other question, maybe these, I mean, it's obvious, these are things and their opposites. So the exact opposite of the piece of Shabbat is Klei Milchama, is weaponry. So if we went back one, the opposite of inner goodness is hate. So these are things and their opposites.
Things and their opposites. It sounds like a Jeopardy category. I'll take letters and their opposites for. So Zion, right? So there's something very interesting about this. I just want to say, think of the biblical law that the altar, the actual, you can't. First of all, you can't bring a weapon into the mikdash. It's not allowed. But also, it can't be made of hewn stone, of gazit. Right, you can't build the mizbeach, the altar, to offer a sacrifice of hewn stone, because hewn stone represents weaponry, probably. So there's a sense in which sanctuary, Shabbat is a sanctuary in time. Anyone ever say that? I feel like someone wrote a book about that. Yeah, someone that also prayed with their feet. So the Heschel. So So there's a sense in which if Shabbat is a sanctuary, there aren't weapons in our sanctuaries, right? We're actually not allowed to do that. So it's a peaceful place. I want to suggest something nefarious or sinister, though, actually, that you think they're opposites, but one of the things about the Zohar is always breaking down categories a little. So there's actually something about a thing and its opposite, which are often more related than we like to imagine. And there is about the effort to create Shabbat or rest in mystical traditions, very much a violence to it and a violent imagining of the quality of Shabbat. What do I mean? So this is represented, by the way, in the mystical edition of the Psalm, Mizmor LeDavid, Havu Lashem B'nei Elim, the 20, which Psalm? The 20, someone help with the number. I want to say 29th Psalm, but I may be wrong. Is that right? Anyway, it's a psalm about God reigning over the flood which destroyed the world. God tears down trees and thunders and lightning, and animals go flying away in panic. It's a horrible psalm. And it's the one we return the Torah to on Shabbat. And it also is entered into the Kabbalat Shabbat Friday night liturgy. And in many Siddurim, it says you stand because it's of extra mystical importance. Reuven Kimmelman is an academic that wrote about the introduction of this psalm into Kabbalat Shabbat. So for folks who want to see more about that, check out his essay on the subject. Great professor of Jewish mystical liturgy. But
I think it's 28, by the way.
Page?
No, it's Psalm 28. I think you're right.
Psalm 28. Yeah. Thank you. I was one off. So that's good to know. So why would we sing such a destructive psalm on Shabbat? Why would it have extra importance? So there is something in the mystical tradition that viewed the act of human restraint, of not perfecting, of curtailing our activity, as needing more than common peace, as needing a sort of sadomasochism, weird talk, but a self-violence to restrain oneself, or the mystical quest to have peace or to connect with things sometimes involves self-denial or self-obliteration, which is where you get in many Jewish pietistic traditions, like the Hasidei Ashkenaz in the 12th and 13th centuries, and even the Maggid of Mezrich, an early Chassid, was known as a great ascetic, or the Vilna Gaon, whether Hasidic. You get strains of asceticism in the sense that there's this idea of ayin, of needing to erase the self in order to really connect with others. So that's part of Shabbat too. So there's this weird interplay of Shabbat of being both peaceful, but sometimes having a violent element needed in it. I think that is not unfamiliar to the Zohar. It's a theme that emerges at different times. So I think it's unfamiliar to most modern Jews that Shabbat can be violent, because it's also the opposite of violence. But I do think both are at play for the Zohar.
Sorry, and for the record, actually, no, you're right, 29, Kaf Tet. Sorry, my numbers are often a little off.
It's all right, thank you. Any more comments on violent rest? The title of the sequel to Heschel's A Sanctuary in Time. Okay. Rav Kook, by the way, has perhaps the best piece extolling the violence of Shabbat in his Ein Ayah. It's a gory piece of Shabbat. Okay. And now Kabbalat Shabbat will never be the same. So, Alat Atvav, Amra Kameh, Ribon Alma Nicha Kamach Lemivri Bi Alma Da'ana At Mishmach. Amrala Vav Ant Vidai Lachon Atun Atvan Dishmi Atun Baraza Dishmi V'Chakikin Ugalifin Bishmi La Ivri Bachu Alma. So the letter Vav entered. She said to Master of the World, "May it please you to create the world by me, for I am a letter of your name." Now this is an interesting claim because Vav just says, "I am a letter of your name," which on the surface seems like an imprecise claim or a not compelling claim. Like if you go to court and say, "Well, I'm in your name," well, what about it? Yeah, like that's nice. So I was torn between whether this is just the claim above and sort of a happenstance claim of sorts, or whether that's plenty sufficient, or whether there's something intentional about the non-specific nature of Vav's claim. Like, is there something very plain about Vav as a plain line? He replied, Vav, it is not enough for you and Hey to be letters of my name, including the mystery. It is enough for you and Hey to be letters of my name, including the mystery of my name, engraved and carved in my name. So it's not just included in the name, engraved in the name, carved in the name. I think each of these are meant to deepen, yes, the sense in which these things are in the name. I will not create the world by either of you. So if we're talking about emanation, yes, there has to be a way to get from God to the world. And you have to lose some God as you emanate the world. That's just the only way to do it. We usually talk about the other part of emanation, the parts of God in godliness in the world, yes? Or as the Ramban says in Breshit, that, and Michael, I see your hand is raised, we'll get to you in 1 second, that when God breathes into people, you can't breathe without breathing your essence. That's the Ramban Nachmanides comment on Vayipach Bi'apav Nishmat Chaim, that God breathed breath, the soul of life into them. So there's that element of emanation, but this is the opposite element, that like you need to shed some stuff to go out of God and into stuff. Yeah, Michael. And if others are raising their hands, I only see so many, pictures at once. So.
The tension is mounting because Yud, Hey, and Vav do not leave God's presence. So I'm waiting to see what happens when this all culminates.
Yeah, so they get stuck there. And there's an honor in being in God's name, and also that's not the world. So just note also for the mystic, right, that wants to see God's name everywhere in the world and only God's name, that actually this is a counterintuitive teaching in a mystical text. You imagine them looking around and only seeing God's name. There are even such mystical meditative practices. But here, the letters are in the name and not starting the Torah. In other words, you need the other, like there's more to the communication than just God's name. So that is important. The letters, so we're going to finish this teaching today, I believe. Not that we're ever done, but Alat ad Daled vat Gimel Amru Uv Hachi Amar Uvlon Dai Lachon Lemebe Daim Da Daha Miskinin La Yitbatlun Min Alma Utzrichen Legmol Im Hun Tivu Dalet Ihu Miskina Gimel Gemola Tivu Latit Parshun Da Min Da V'Dai Lachon Lemezan Da Ledain. So the letters Dalet and Gimel entered and made the same request. He replied to them as well. Now it's interesting, you almost get the sense that they don't present, Rachel said before the Chet, some letters here get a fuller treatment than others. This isn't meant to be a system, there's a lack of systemization in this teaching. It's a teaching that was passed down, so not every element of every teaching is in every teaching. That makes sense? Letters Dalet and Gimel entered and made the same request. He replied to them as well, it is enough for you to be with each other, since the poor will never cease from the world, which is what it says in the Torah, right? It both commands the extermination of poverty, but then it says, because there will always be poor people in the land. So there's a sense in which, lo alecha hamlacha likmor, you can't be free from trying, but we'll never perfect the world. So in any event, because that's true, this stands for gomel chas, this stands for, the Gimel stands for Gomel, for sending goodness, for like Gemilut Chasadim. And the Daled symbolizes a dal. Daled Lamed means poor or destitute. It means someone in poverty. So this is like doing kindness to those who are poor. So they're together. Do not separate from one another. There's an interplay between those in need and those who give that are attached to each other and is enough for one of you to sustain the other. Right? So that in and of itself is either sufficiently meritorious that you don't need to create the world, or sufficiently preoccupying because it'll never end. And I think that's more the sense of the teaching. Like, how do you have time to create the world? There's always going to be need, and you're always going to be needing to do kindness for the need. You know, when people kind of say, sometimes there is a feeling like the need is overwhelming, we never have enough resources to solve the problems, right? That's the nature of the world, the Zohar is teaching, is that, you know, back then, there will never be enough resources to solve the problems, but it will be sufficiently preoccupying to be trying. There's also a sense in which both of these are supporting each other in the role. You know, it's non-colonialist in a certain way. Like, you get the sense that the impoverished person is playing a little bit of an important role as well, because it's always there. The Zohar in Parshat Yitro, when we get there, we're in Breshit now, so we're just in the bet of Breshit. We haven't gotten off the first letter, but when we get all the way into the book of Shemot and we get up to the Ten Commandments, 2043, after the space aliens have invaded and we're doing the class on the moon, there's an extended praise of the poor in the Zohar that mirrors what many people would expect from more Christian teachings. And many people have written about the Zohar's adoration of people in poverty. So query whether this is already part of that or not. I don't know. So the letter bet. Okay. Questions, comments? Alatat bet amrale ribon ama nicha kamach lemivribi ama devi mivarchen lach le'ela vitata. Amar lakudsha brichu ha vadaibach ivri alma va'at tehe sheruta lemivri alma. We do the Aleph now too. Kaimat Aleph. No, okay. Well. Letter Bet entered. She said to him, "Master of the world, may it please you to create the world by me. For by me you are blessed above and below." The Blessed Holy One replied, "Indeed, by you I will create the world. You will be the beginning of creation." So Bet is the word for Baruch or Barich, of blessing. And blessing takes the day. Now, one notion of Bet, when we say above and below, note the shape of the Bet is an above and a below with a connection. Do you see that there? Bet. I don't know, but there's also a sense in which going right to left, the connection is on the right, like you're ready to read moving from there, you know what I'm saying? In the shape of it. So the world here is based on a few things. It's based on the connection of above and below. It's based on blessing. So the blessing works two ways, right? Blessing is God blessing, but blessing is also how we like praise God. So there's a sense in which blessing God is the telos or point of the Torah or the world, or our lives, or the spiritual quest is to bless God. So immediately we see the reframe of spiritual worship not as something as an end for ourselves, like to improve our lives or to live in a particular way, but actually for God's sake or to connect. So you see the Zohar already saying the point of the Torah is to connect above and below, right? And it's not a directional thing per se. It's to form connections between our world and another world. So that is a powerful claim. Just one other note about Bet in the mystical tradition. Baruch, that root. So Bet is 2, and Resh is 200, and Chaf is 20. All of the letters of the name, all of the letters in the word of blessing are multiples of 2 in different tens in a base 10 counting. So Base 10 counting, of course, is the Sefirot system. We're in a base 10 spiritual system here, and sometimes base 7 when we go with the lower 7 Sefirot as its own system. So there's a sense in which we're dealing with the multiplication. Blessing is the multiplication of the Sefirot, which we've seen before, if that makes sense. It's multiplying these things by each other or causing them to communicate with one another is a definition of spiritual multiplication here. And there are ways in which also, when we're talking about emanation, we're also talking about how do we go from the one to the many? How do we go from one God to discord, but not even discord, just to many things, to you and me, to different opinions, to tzaddik, to tet, and to a thing and its opposite, right? How do we get to things and their opposites? And the answer is through blessing. It's actually through God's blessing, which ironically relates us back to God, but also the blessing, which always comes in the form of many, of multiple, of stuff, right? Like if we're blessed, like usually there's plenty. So lots of stuff is actually the antithesis of unity. So the bet stands at the apex of this question. The connection between above and below is also the connection between one and many. And bet representing many, but the first of many, two. It's the first after one, becomes an important part of blessing as related or very close to one, but just at the apex of two. Does that make sense? So all of these things are bet. Now the Ramban Nachmanides in his commentary on the Torah refers to this and other teachings related to this as what he calls the sod of bet, the secret of bet. So if you're ever reading that commentary and wondering, like, what's the great secret of bet? It's this blessing concept here. This is the bet secret that Ramban is referring to. Maybe not the Zohar version of it explicitly, because his Kabbalah was non-Zohar, but the conceptual framework. And we'll just do Aleph. And if anyone has anything they want to add about bet. Kaima at Aleph la'alat, Amar la kucha brichu, Aleph, lama late ant alat kamai, kishar kol atvan. Amra kameri bon alma begin the chamena de chol atvan nafku min kamach bela toalta mana avid taman. Betu da hayehita lad bet nivaz beza rav ravada. Vayut lemalki ila laavra nivaz beza. Diahu laabdu lemehav laachra. Amar la kucha brichu Aleph, afagav da'at bet ba'ivri oma, at teheresh l'chol atvan, late bi yichuda lebach, bach yishrun kol chushbinin v'chol uvda da'alma, v'chol yichuda lo hebe ala ba'at Aleph. Okay, so the letter Aleph stood and did not enter. The Blessed Holy One said to her, so Aleph doesn't come. There's something, Aleph doesn't come. Aleph is a silent letter. So Aleph doesn't come. Aleph doesn't say anything. It doesn't make any noise. Here, resonance here of the humility of Ayin, which is guttural. So it, Anavare, Ayin didn't come. We said some, Ayin was only referred to, but there's something with the audible quality of Ayin also, which is not silent, but close, not really close, but it is guttural, often confused as silent. So but there it was fake humility, or the humility was fraught. But here, Aleph actually doesn't come. Aleph doesn't pretend to be humble. Aleph just doesn't come. So God actually goes to the Aleph, which is a different thing, and says, why don't you come? So she says, I saw all the letters leaving your presence fruitlessly. Like everyone else didn't get hired. So what could I do there? Furthermore, look, you have given this enormous gift to the lever bet. Everyone else got rejected. And also you chose someone already. It is not fitting for the exalted king to take back a gift he has given to his servant and give it to another. Even if I would come and you choose me, but Bet, I'd feel bad for Bet. There's something about how Aleph is always in service of other letters, right, as a more silent letter. The Blessed Holy One said, Aleph, I think here of Aleph as the sous chef, out of the limelight, doing a lot of the important work, but without wanting to ever take the credit. Although I will create a world in the letter Bet, you will be the first of all the letters. Only through you do I become one. Right? With you, all counting begins in every deed in the world. No union is actualized except by Aleph. So Aleph is echad, which stands for one, and it has the numerology of one. So as one, it actually stands in some contrast to the multiplicity we spoke about with Bet. And actually, it is the starting point, yes? Aleph is the place in the Zohar system of Keter, up here, will or nothingness. This is represented by the letter Aleph. Many elementary mystical meditations begin with meditating on the letter Aleph for this reason, as a place of nothingness or emptiness. I think of it as the Jewish Shavasana, the end of yoga, where the effort is to let go of everything and a nullification of the self, or death in that ultimate sense. So Aleph represents a sort of death here too, of not presenting oneself, of total nullification to the will of God, the totally non-understandable will of God, right? Not will is manifest through wisdom, which we can't understand, or understanding, which we can sort of understand in our awe, or kindness, we can actually understand because we can be kind. No, Aleph is none of that. So it is unity. It is God's oneness, and it's the place all of this comes from, and a place that's crucial, but it's not a place we can reach. So it's not going to be in the Torah, which is communicative to us, but it is going to be the first letter as a result of that, because it needs to maintain a place in our system. The unity of things is what undergirds all of this, and is ultimately the point of the letters, is to create unity through this connectivity. So Aleph connects everything, right? In the same way that Keter here, literally, if you see the lines, right, it connects everything. It connects everything. So that's sort of what we mean. So we've concluded the audition of the letters. We've concluded the audition of the letters. I feel like it could be a ballet, and sounds like one to me. And I don't know if anyone has any reflections at the end of the teaching of the letters. This is a long teaching, the longest one we've done. The other ones will be more concise. So I hope you've enjoyed this, but there's a lot of good gems, both about the letters, just enjoyable little teachings, but also deep sort of things reflected in here about the nature of religion, Torah, communication, connection of one and many, which are at the heart of what it means to be people, right? Are to put thoughts in words and to communicate. This is very much in the tradition of thinking about people as communicative beings. I see, and so Noam Chomsky might endorse this. I think he is one of the linguists, right, who feels that, I don't know that most other linguists agree, that words shape reality more than others. And so this would sort of be in that sense of it. Yeah. Rachel, Professor Friedberg, you're on mute.
Is there anything, have you seen anything about the order of the letters in the alphabet? Anywhere? I mean, because okay, so this whole, audition for, the arc of the story relies on the fact that it's, okay, not the second to last one who's gonna win. And I'm just wondering if somewhere in all of this, meaning of the shapes and the words that the letters begin, if there's anything about how did Chet wind up being Tet's neighbor or whatever?
Oh yeah, why are the alphabets in this order? Yeah, so there's an interesting debate in Jewish philosophy, which maybe I should talk about sometime. Maimonides famously said that all languages are social constructs. And so the debate occurs around what do we mean? A lot of thinkers call Hebrew Lashon HaKodesh, which scholars say developed during the Second Temple, a superiority of Hebrew to other languages amongst Hebrew speakers in their reverence for it. Similarly, many Arabic thinkers developed the same about Arabic, right? They think it's the best language. That's a common thought among Islamic. They also think of their language as the holy language, to the exclusion of other languages, as many Jewish thinkers do Hebrew. So Maimonides famously said that Hebrew is only holy because it has a lack of profanity in it. it's in the Guide to the Perplexed, it's the lack of profanity in Hebrew that makes it holy, whereas other letters or other languages are more crass. But it's purely a construct. In other words, it arose at some time by people who languages developed as they developed, and people in that region of the world eventually came to speak this language, which we call Hebrew. And in their system, which was a God-driven society, in his imagination of it, they didn't construct bad words in the language more because they had more God consciousness. And so in that way, it's more fitting as a language. But it's purely a construct, whereas most thinkers, the Ramban, blasts him for this claim as crazy. But as Hebrew is like the building blocks of the world. So I don't know, but Maimonides would sort of say, well, consult like a historiolinguist. I don't know if there are such people, like a historian of linguistics or a linguistic historian or something like that, about what it is about the letters which cause them to emerge, not just in this alphabet, but in so many other related alphabets in a comparable order. Or is there something mystical, right, about the actual order of these letters? Sorry, I don't have more. I'm sure there is stuff about it because there are a lot of Jewish debates about the unique or non-unique nature of Hebrew and whether that uniqueness is mystical, innate, constructed, real, imagined. I don't know if that's an answer to your question. It's more of a deflection, but that's what I can offer you. And Joe, our resident expert on languages, wants to say something.
No doubt about that, though. But as I was reflecting, I was kind of struck. I think it was Michael's question at the top about why the kind of category, like why I think it was the letter Yud was not told to kind of go away, but it was sort of changed up. So I don't know. I think it was your question, Michael. I don't know if you got an answer to that, but I'm wondering maybe what I feel like I may have seen is there were kind of two categories of responses to the letters. One category being that there was something about the essence of the letter where it was not of this world. So all the letters that were in Shem Hashem, plus the Tzadi and the Tet and the Chet, and I think there were a few more. They sort of couldn't come in because they were sort of, for some reason, not of the world.
The Gimel, the Dalet, the Sum. Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah.
And then the second category would be letters like the Dalet and the Gimel and the Mem and the Lamed, where they were like firmly of the world, but they had their own place. And so the bet kind of maybe was kind of with being part of a bracha was kind of interchange point maybe or something like that. So that was, I guess, my sort of sense of like, I'm wondering if that's, if there's something there, if that bifurcation of the letters, some letters being like purely mystical, some letters being purely not profane, but profane in the sense that maybe like materialistic or of the world, if that's something that's kind of a theme that's going to come back.
That's actually a beautiful conclusion or capstone, I think, to the what is known as the Alpha Beta de Rabbi Akiva. That and I don't know if this teaching, I suppose because that's what it's called, is attributed, at least in the oral tradition, to Rabbi Akiva, although obviously we're reading a medieval text quoting it, although it is quoted in comparable versions in a variety of midrashic collections. Which you can find all over. I think most from a similar time period. So it was known, this teaching is known not just in the mystical context, but in other contexts as well. All right, next week we'll continue with the first 4 words of the Torah. We're like moving along. We got to the first letter, and now we're gonna move into like the words. So it's, the mystical read of the Torah is, intentional. And with that, I bid everyone a great week. And we'll meet again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you all.